people, and the Kattakuttu Sangam has also done some amazing work, Hana and Rajagopal, and I'm sure you'll talk about that and the impact that it's had, and also the fact that for the first time women are now performing in Kattakuttu. This was unheard of in the past. It's essentially a male form of drama. Then drama, theatre, reaching the unreached programs. Unfortunately, Mangai is not here. She's traveling, otherwise she would have been with us. So the program with Mangai for many years on the reaching the unreached and using again theatre to take, and she used it also to in her day-to-day work with women, using theatre and art and so on to get women to discuss their issues, talk about it, and ultimately lead to empowerment. So today, I visited Pondicherry, one of the villages during my thing, and I met an older woman there who basically said that it was the influence of your parents who came to our village when I was a young woman and I'd never really stepped out of home and never done anything and never thought I could do anything, because the environment was such that if you're a woman, you basically stayed at home. But your father and mother came here and completely transformed our lives. Like, we really could believe that we could do anything then. And so that kind of change that came about was in a large part of a strong regional presence. But we decided that we need to expand and go beyond these three languages. So now we have this year Marathi and Hindi also. So we will have 5 journalists who have been selected this year for the Mina Swaminathan fellowships, and I think 3 of you are here and 2 are online, but we will be working with you hopefully to see that you all come out with some good stories. And in the last few years I've been very impressed with the quality of the work done, and I think several of the former fellows are here as well. Quality of the work, quality of the story, some of which have had policy impact. So I think that's the ultimate dream of a journalist, right? If your story could actually help change policy, then what could be better than that? So of course one story unlikely to change policy, and one has to continue to write and persist and bring out these things to the open, and ultimately if people take notice and act on it, then it's extremely satisfying. So I think the Waipin Island story, which was told by one of our media fellows on the flooding and the difficulties that people are facing there year after year, I think has led to some action, in the sense that it's now declared a disaster. So at least they are eligible for some compensation. State has recognized that this is actually a disaster that is always partly man-made and partly climate change related. So very happy to welcome Arun Ram today to give us the lead talk, followed by a panel discussion on this topic. And then of course this is part of a 2 trustees members and all those others who we have invited. Of course the speakers for the day and all the participants. I know we also have with us some farmers and fisher women who will also be interacting with the journalists later on this afternoon. So thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. It is now my pleasure to invite Mr. Arun Ram, resident editor of the Times of India, Chennai, to give the inaugural address and to officially announce the Mina Swaminathan Media Fellowship Cohort of 2026. Mr. Arun Ram worked with 6 newspapers and a magazine across 3 states before joining the Times of India as part of the Chennai launch team. He is a British evening scholar in print journalism and the winner of the Sarojini Naidu Prize for Best Reporting. He's also the co-author of former ISRO scientist Nambi Narayanan's autobiography, Ready to Fire: How India and I Survived the ISRO Spy Case. May I please request Mr. Arun Ram to come to the stage.
When I walked through the door, there was a sense of, there was a combination of emotions which consumed me. Then I realized it was a bit of gratitude along with nostalgia. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm no stranger to this place, but many of you would know that. Even Soumya didn't know, for that matter. When I came to Chennai as a journalist, I moved from Hyderabad to Chennai in 1999. This was one of my favorite jaunts, and spent long hours with Professor Swaminathan. Not so much with Mina Swaminathan, but many months and years. I've been a frequent visitor here. I still have Malati's number saved on my mobile. I was looking for her, but she didn't recognize me. So yeah, I was much younger. Yeah, that's the nostalgia part of it. And gratitude is that, I started in Chennai as a science reporter. So where else to go when you are a science reporter? I was covering health and science, and MSSRF was one of the must-go places, of course. And I've got great stories, and I think this place has also helped me shape myself as a journalist with a kind of scientific bent of mind, if I may boast a bit. So though I have not known Mina Swaminathan so closely, of course I was aware of her work, and as Soumya said, she was a bit media shy, I think. She was never in the limelight. She never wanted to be in the limelight. But as we know, her silent work, her field work, her thoughts, her inspirations have gone a long way in shaping ICDS and many other policies. And sometimes, it's not so tangible, the kind of work people like Mina Swaminathan did. You can't measure because the work she has, not just because she was part of UNICEF or she was part of global policy making in a way. More than that, how many hearts, how many lives she has touched. And I've always felt, and I think I once told Professor Swaminathan also, they were made for each other, the couple, that is. The kind of, I can only imagine what brainstorming would have happened between the couples. And the contribution is here to see. And I'm not talking about the 3 wonderful daughters. Also I think, as a journalist, I should do a bit of introspection because, I think there are quite a few journalists here. So one is, are we doing justice to women empowerment? It's quite a cliched usage now, women empowerment. It dominates many newsroom discussions, including mine. So I think we are going through a phase. I see women empowerment as a kind of first we started with, we are not conscious of gender. I'm being very introspective. As a journalist, I was not gender conscious. I would do stories. I would not seek out stories of women. That was how I began. Because the argument was, why should I project women? Why can't it be just a human being? Then the realization dawned with a bit of knowledge that women need to be focused on. Women's stories have to be sought and done. I think the media is going through that phase, and the real women empowerment would happen when we come back to the old thing about we are a gender agnostic. When I don't have to consciously think that this story is about a woman, projecting about the success of a woman or the struggles of a woman, I think that is when the real women empowerment happens. Right now there's a lot of discussion in newsrooms and outside, of course, whether are we doing the right kind of stories. I'm not sure, but then we are still kind of looking out whether we are open to discussion. In fact, my colleague Asha is here. She's one of her feature writers, and 3 of her feature writers, I'm proud to say, all are women. And one of my crime reporters is a woman. 50% of our desk are women. If you walk in around midnight to our newsroom, you'll see mostly women, because men are lazy, they go home early. So much for women empowerment. But I can't say the same for all newsrooms. I think women still constitute only 30-40% of journalists, and editorial positions much less, maybe 10-15%. That is something which media itself will have to introspect. So yeah, so kind of stories we do. So Asha was telling me that I think when in the workshop, Nithya was talking about how you academics do a 8,000 or 80,000 word study, and media writes an 800 word glorifying a woman who did something. So yeah, I admit that, I accept that. So I'm really still confused. I'm here to ask you, ask you suggestions on what better can we do, because we work under tremendous constraints. I won't call it pressure. Pressure is all in the game of journalism. We process about 1 lakh words a day, right? It's like bringing out a book every day, and there'll be mistakes. There'll be mistakes in news judgment. There'll be mistakes in writing. There'll be mistakes in editing. Not justifying any of those mistakes, but we work under these pressures. And I'm not even talking about other pressures. I'm talking about the intrinsic constraints and pressures a newspaper goes through. The same with the television or digital media. So when we write, and mind you, 1,000 words is the maximum I can accommodate as a piece. That is a major grouse of many writers. My friend Aparna Karthikeyan is here. She is one of the wonderful writers I've come across. 9 hours a day. That is one of my, it's one of my constants in my work shelf. So why I took her name is that she's a brilliant writer, and she writes long pieces, which I would love to carry. People like long piece, long form writing. And I should confess that the Times of India, or for that matter, many newspapers in the country are not able to carry it. Off the record, even the Chief Minister, day before yesterday, said he wanted to write a 1,700 piece. I said, sorry, it has to be 900 words. I'm still negotiating. So yeah, so that is the space constraint, and time constraint is something which we work, we race against time. That's a big major challenge. So I'm open to suggestions from you, from academics, from fellow journalists, how we can do stories. And another criticism of is we always write negative stories. It is a fact that negative stories get a lot of readership. So every day I get a report of the top 50 stories across the country, which are read digitally, because print we can't really read the readership. So most of them are crime, rape, murder. So should we be driven by that algorithm to do more crime stories? No, I don't agree with that. But we can't ignore the negative stories. We have to do women struggles, yes. But then that is when we make a conscious effort to highlight the success stories of women. But then we also face criticism that, you picked out, your cherry-picked one success story, ignoring the million stories of struggle and oppression of women, which is true. So I really don't know. I don't have an answer how to go about this, but it's a constant struggle to learn and reinvent ourselves. But I do have the conviction that positive stories do, positive in the sense success stories. To give an example, we recently, maybe last year, one of our feature writers did a story on Arivoli, that Pudukkottai experiment. The brilliant experiment. I think Sheila Rani Chungat was behind it. It all started with one woman learning to cycle, and how she cycled to liberty, to emancipation, to greater strength, and how a whole village was cycling to knowledge, new skill sets, independence, development, empowerment. So there is no, it's one of the shining examples of these stories also, I think, inspire not just people, but inspire ourselves, media, to do more such stories, because that is one of the most read stories, in fact. So I was surprised. Usually positive stories don't get so many eyeballs. So yeah, the stories we tell, I think also now we need to look at should just women, the stories be about women. I think they have to be about women, but also we need to have women not just as stories, but as storytellers. We need more women to tell stories, their stories, other stories, and get women to do stories of not just women, any stories. So, in other words, more journalists whose thoughts, who have to be heard and read more. I think that's the best way of empowering women and giving more women a chance. If you look at the numbers, I think it's not just media. Look at our government. Out of the 234 MLAs, we have 12 women. 34 ministers. Any guesses how many women ministers? One, Geeta Jeevan. So this is indeed a problem. We talk about 30%, 33% reservation. How many? But for Seeman's party, which never wins a seat, nobody gives 50% for women. He gives 50%. I really appreciate him for that. So this is something which we generally talk about, but neither politicians nor media really does much to empower women. I think, as I said, sooner than later, I'm sure that we'll come that full circle, and we will do stories about human beings without being conscious, being gender agnostic, and that's when the real women empowerment will happen. And when that happens, people like Mina Swaminathan will always be remembered. Thank you. Did someone send me the names? Okay, wait. Yeah, yeah, please.
This year's fellows include Kanmani Tangarasu, Richard Joseph, Subhashri Parida, Mukund, Sana Ijaz. If you're present in person, could you please join us on stage? I think some people are joining us virtually, but
Nobody else.
yeah.
These are the fellows, right? And they will get what? Can you explain what's this? I mean, what do they?
Sure.
Would you like to introduce yourself? Just which state you're from and language? Yeah. They'll you at the podium.
Hello, I am Richard Joseph from Kerala. I am from Deepika newspaper. Deepika is the first Malayalam daily in Kerala. I am a reporter in Trivandrum Bureau. Deepika, Trivandrum Bureau. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kanmani. I'm working as assistant editor in Doordarshan, Chennai.
Hello, I am Mukund Pingle from Nasik, Maharashtra. I am from Sakal Media Group, and Sakal's one product that is Agrovan, and Agrovan is a dedicated agriculture newspaper for farming community.
Yes. Subhashri, could you unmute and introduce yourself, please?
Hello everyone, myself Subhashri Parida. I am from Odisha.
Thank you. Sana is not present virtually. But thank you so much for all introducing yourselves. Can we just have one last round of applause for all of the fellows? Thank you. I now invite Dr. Swaminathan to felicitate Mr. Arun Ram on stage. Thank you. We will now move on to our next session, a panel discussion titled Framing Gender, Storytelling Across Platforms. I request our panelists to join us on stage as I do the introductions. First, Dr. Hannah de Bruin. She holds a PhD in Indology from Leiden University in the Netherlands. She's written widely on Kattekuttu theatre tradition, women performers, and Tamil culture. She was also one of the co-founders of the Kattekuttu Sangam and Kattekuttu Gurukulam. Saurabh Gupta, Associate Editor with NDTV in Mumbai. He oversees reporting and digital content production for NDTV 24/7. With 17 years of newsroom experience, he works across television and digital platforms and brings a sharp sense of storytelling to complex issues. We also welcome Aparna Karthikeyan, an independent journalist and author based in Chennai. Her book 9 Rupees an Hour documents the disappearing livelihoods of rural Tamil Nadu. She has also written 5 books for children. Her award-winning series on traditional crops in Tamil Nadu, Let Them Eat Rice, will soon be published as an anthology. Next, Gayatri is a media professional and community communication practitioner with more than 18 years of experience in radio broadcasting and audio production. She's the station manager of Radio Ganesha FM 88.8 Community Radio. Earlier, she led Kadal Osai FM 90.4 Community Radio in Pamban, where she mentored many young people in radio production. Moderating this discussion is Jyoti Shaler, Head of Communications and Donor Outreach at MSSRF.
Hello, sorry. Vanakkam, good morning everyone. Welcome to MSSRF and welcome to today's panel discussion on framing gender, storytelling across platforms. My name is Jyoti. I'm the head of communications and donor outreach here at MSSRF. I've also been a print journalist in Mumbai for several years, covering different beats and working for different newspapers. So I've often looked at the intersection of gender with health, communities, and governance. We all know that stories are very important. And the stories that we consume, maybe the print stories that we read in newspapers, the ones we watch on YouTube, OTT platforms, they all leave certain images in our heads, in our minds, and we form perceptions. That's the reason why it is very important the way these stories are told. So on the panel today, we have 4 immensely talented people who work across different platforms, theatre, television news, long-form writing and digital formats, and community radio. We're going to keep the discussion very simple and try to understand how each one of them look at gender when they do their storytelling. So Hannah, I want to start with you first. Thank you for joining us. You are a theatre scholar and you've done immense work in Kattekuttu, a rural form of theatre in Tamil Nadu. Can you please start with explaining what Kattekuttu is and how has it evolved over the years? Do you see a shift in the way gender stories or women's stories are told on the stage today?
Thank you, Jody. Am I audible? Yeah. And thank you also, Foundation and Saumya Madhumita for having me. And this is also my remembering Amma very much, who has been very inspirational for our organization and who was one of the ambassadors together with Appa of the Kattekuttu Sangam near to Kanchipuram. So yeah, I work in theatre both as a scholar and a practitioner. I've never been able to make the the choice between these two, and they are inseparable for me. Katekute is a Tamil form of theatre, and I heard Aparna being labeled long-term writing. This is long-term experiencing. And our narratives are experiential events. We start at 10 o'clock and it goes on till 6 the next morning. The Katekute Sangam, and in particular my other half, has been instrumental in introducing for the very first time girls and women in the Katekute tradition, which was an all-male theatre, because women were supposed not to be able to perform, or they should not perform, because this theatre still sits in a kind of sacral context. And as a woman, we menstruate, and then apparently you cannot perform. So the perspective on the narratives is both from the side of the women performers as well as the recipients of our stories, the spectators in the audience. Though the women are on the stage, it's still a long journey ahead of us. For the women, there are different times in their lives which define whether they can go on performing. The first time is when they come of age. They were taken out of the school and off the stage, because as a woman, you are not supposed to stand in the gaze of the male audience. The next moment is when they pass their 12th standard exam. Then theatre is not a career most parents envisage for their children. And the final one is marriage. Husbands and in-laws don't allow the daughter-in-law to be on the stage. So it is still an ongoing fight, and only very few of the women we have trained continue in the profession. The media can play a big role here, I think, in doing a better job of highlighting these problems. The fact that Tamil, the most rich form of theatre you can imagine, does not get any attention at all other than in the Sangamam, where you get 10 minutes, which is not kute, and also as an instrument or a tool to kind of create these kind of experiential narratives, as well as a tool to kind of give the performers life skills which are essential to build a career.
You said women are on the stage, but it's still a long journey. So
it's yeah, they just manage, and so we are now at the moment where they have joined professional companies. There the issue is, will they get a main role to perform? Because there they have to compete with the other male actors. And so this is a competitive field. It's a professional field. They all have to make the money. So why should that man who does the main female role, because the female roles were done by men, give that role to a woman? So there is still a lot of work to be done. And within the Gurukulam, they had a quite protective kind of safe environment to train. But now they're out in the real world. And that is a very different matter.
So let's hope that change comes in sooner. There is change, but yeah.
There is change, more, yeah. And the impact of the woman on the stage is a big change. To see a woman perform, even if it's exactly the same text, exactly the same songs, these sound different when they are being sung by a woman than produced by a man. Her interpretation of that specific role is different because the female characters have always been interpreted from a male perspective. And therefore can be very patriarchal, because this is how the men see the role of women in our case, the epics, and the major crime story in the epic, the disrobing of Draupadi.
Thank you, Hannah, for sharing those thoughts. I'll come back with a follow-up question to you, but I want to move on to Saurabh now with my next question. You work in television, where news unfold in a matter of minutes or even seconds, perhaps. In that process, in that hustle, in that rush, does the gender angle get missed, mishandled, or completely ignored altogether?
The honest admission is yes. And it happens, like you said, because television has very little time for sitting down and planning. It's immediate. A reporter filing for television I think, barely gets 3 hours to file his story, 3 to 4 hours. And that makes it an immensely challenging task to, even if he or she wants to try and factor in everything that they may want in the story. There are also logistical challenges with television. But having said that, I've worked with an organization that has always tried to avoid that, tried to change what you pointed out. And the one example that I can share is for years we've been covering, and you've covered that as well, rural distress in Vidarbha. And what we've seen, initially we would go and when we covered the farmer suicides, it would always be about the men. And then there was a report at one point of what impact it was having on the families of those farmers who had died by suicide. And that is when we started looking at better representation of gender in those stories as well. And what we found was that there were so many stories to tell that we had simply chosen to ignore out of our own ignorance. So that, I think, is changing. Today, I think the brief given to any reporter is that find a story that would have proper representation, and also ensure that the story gets told in a way that this whole gap that we've had for decades is, in a way, we try and amend that. It's not possible to do it in one go, but try and make amends. Let's make those changes.
That gives me some hope about the newsrooms. Aparna, my next question comes to you. Your work is kind of opposite in terms of timelines, is opposite than Saurabh's. You work at a slower pace. You do long forms, deeply reported stories. A few days ago, we had a telephone conversation and you mentioned something interesting. You said that let's not look at women's stories as sunshine stories or those of challenges. Nitya ma'am also mentioned that today in her workshop, in the session in the morning. So I want to pose that question to you again. While reporting, did you come across any woman who did not fit the usual media image of a hero or a victim? And how do you tell these stories?
So thank you so much for having me here today. Such a pleasure to be part of the discussion. I think I'll start with saying that trying to label a woman's experience as a victory or a complete disaster is a very lazy way of doing it, right? And we are looking at a easy way out. When we say that this is either a spectacularly successful story or a story that. Having said that, as Arun said, there are things that people look for. There are certain kind of stories that do get read. So when we are talking about the majority of the people who do not fit both ends, we are looking at the everyday lives of people. There is no peg, there is no hook, right? How do you draw the person into that story? That is the biggest challenge when we are trying not to look at either of the extreme. And how do you convince an editor to carry that story? I think for me that started in 2012 with The Hindu when I started doing a series called I Am, which was about the everyday lives of the people in Chennai. So I went around looking at all the vendors, the people who are part of the Chennai landscape who are otherwise not written about. We would see these people but not even know the names of the people. Okay, and that kind of led me to Pari. At which time Saina told me to do the same kind of stories but from the villages. And I had an opportunity to go, into the rural parts of Tamil Nadu to look for some. One of the stories I actually did was from Kadekota Sangam, and Hannah helped me frame that story, obviously, because my knowledge was so limited. And I think the example that I would like to give today is of salt pan worker. Her name is Rani. Okay, and she kind of reframed my whole idea of what is, an everyday story of a person, the quiet resilience that, people show in their everyday lives and how that can be highlighted. For me, she kind of made me think of, the labor that is involved in the production of food as an Amritanchan Damba. Okay, it is the most unexpected thing that you think of, right? Like you think of inputs, you think of seeds, you think of soil, all of that. For me, she made me think of it as an Amritanjan Dabba because I can't imagine having a single meal without salt. She makes salt every single day with her own hands. And one of the things that she told me, she carries a small drawstring pouch, surkupai, and in that she has a Vicks inhaler and Amritanjan Dabba, and she says she can't get through her day without that. That's the kind of pain that is there in her life every single day, and that she's not a heroine. She's not, somebody who has been extremely successful. She's not. But neither is she a victim, except that she is a victim of circumstances, of society, all of that. But in different levels, all of us are, right? But in Rani's case, what she taught me, that kind of struggle, the everyday struggle, that somebody puts in to bring something as basic as salt to my table, that is something that, I wanted to go back and keep looking. So I think she actually opened that door for me in my storytelling.
I like what you mentioned about the Amrutanjan Dabba and the Vicks inhaler. Those are like such nice details and bring out so many layers in stories, and we have a group of journalists today, so I think they'll all resonate with this. Gayatri, my next question is for you. Audio storytelling is now big over the years, thanks to podcasts, radio, of course, and we have audiobooks. Like in community radio, I think the people themselves become the storytellers. But can you tell us what does it take for a woman in the community to come to the mic for the first time?
Thank you for asking such a beautiful first question. First of all, I would like to thank MSSRF and show my gratitude because this is the second opportunity MSSRF is providing us. The first opportunity was provided to us in 2018 through Sangeeta was working at the time, and we got an opportunity to be at the as a part of the Tuticorin conference. And from there, like Pari noticed us, and then we went places. So thank you so much. And about your question, like first of all, to bring in community women from the fishing community, we had to build a trust to them and provide a safe environment, an informal environment where they like. First of all, there'll be inhibitions to come to the studio and then talk about their lives. Then because like people might judge these. They have like so many questions, unanswered questions within them. So we go to the field and record from them, and then we take the stories and then edit and then play it. So once it is played on air and once they listen to their stories by themselves or by their families and all, then they get good feedbacks. And after getting the feedbacks, all the inhibitions will slowly fade away. And because they'll have their own questions like, why should I talk? Who will listen to it, and what impact will it create? Will it give me any problems, or like what? Because they themselves don't know that their experiences are knowledge. So making them understand and then making them creating an impact, or like sharing a success story about her, or like then bringing her forefront as a seashell craft woman or as a dry fish selling woman, and talking about their problems that they are not allowed inside the buses to take their dry fish and then sell it across, like from Pamban to Rameshwaram or from Pamban to Ramnad. Going itself is a big task for them. So which is a very easy thing for other professions, but carrying a dry fish on a bus is a very big thing. So these kind of stories, when we talk on radio or when it creates an impact, and then when there is a particular bus, when someone allows or like give a lift, and that all creates an impact, and then they feel happy. Okay, there is a change in their livelihood. Or when they talk about the alcoholism problems, like in villages like Chinnapalam or Pamban and all, alcoholism plays a very important role. And that's why women itself started to go to fish. Lot of seaweed collectors came upfront because of this issue, alcoholism. So when we talk about these things and when these changes happened, they are able to witness, okay, my story is creating some impact and it is necessary to document our story, or like to be a voice of this. And then the technical part of being in front of mic fades away, because like they just have to give their voice. The rest of the works are done by the community radio itself.
So the takeaway is get more and more women storytellers.
Of course.
Bring them to the mic.
Yes.
As journalists and storytellers, we often criticize or debate about how there is no gender sensitization in institutions, like government institutions, public institutions, or private institutions. But I'm saying this because we have a large group of journalists here. When you look at newsrooms today, there are no trainings or gender sensitization courses within newsrooms. And reporters and journalists or storytellers are often they are left up to their self-drive and self-motivation to look for fellowships like these, which recognize and offer these kind of trainings. So I want to ask you, Saurabh, this first. Why do you think Indian newsrooms lag behind in offering these kind of trainings? And has the situation changed in today's date?
I think it's changing. It's begun to change. For example, like I said, when I have to pitch a story, and I'll just give you two examples in very recent times. When the violence broke out in Manipur and people were being killed, that's when one of the stories that, and like you said, yes, there is a lack of sensitization, but there are, I think, reporters and journalists who want to sensitize themselves, and that is a task many have taken upon themselves. But that specific example of Manipur is, when I went to Manipur, I realized that the stories that we could tell from there were about women. The men were carrying AK-47s, firing at each other, killing. But the women were making sure that by day, shops were opening, houses were running, incomes were made. They have the Ima markets in Manipur. And that kind of, when I started looking at that, it gave me 10 to 15 stories to tell, which for television was like I found the best stories I could. And that's something that I think many of us as journalists have learned, that the demands of a newsroom can be met if we personally also take up that effort to sensitize ourselves. That's one example. And the second example, because we're all going to cover elections now, Tamil Nadu, West Bengal, and in West Bengal the conversation has always been about doles and how it plays out. But again, if you look at that very small amount we were discussing in the morning, that amount is nothing actually. But that amount, like the stories that, for example, I found this one particular story that really touched me. There was this young woman who was getting this direct benefit transfer from the government somewhere in Midnapur district. It's extremely hot in those places. And the fact that she could buy an umbrella for her father, that the pride she felt, so that he wouldn't have to walk to work in the sun. And the other thing that they told us was that this has led men to become more well-behaved and mend their ways, because the money is going into the women's accounts, and the wives can withhold some money if they don't want to, if they don't behave themselves. That's one thing. And we discussed tea gardens in the morning. Again, I think why I say the change is coming is because now the pattas that are being handed over, West Bengal has done it, is being given in the names of women. In Assam also, in the tea gardens, in the beginning of the handing over pattas, there have been women, though there are worries about whether it will continue, whether the trickle will become slow, but it's a beginning. So I think if we identify the stories and if we sensitize ourselves, even if there's a gap, we can make up for it.
I'm glad you said that things are changing, and I do hope that things change further and we have many more fellowships like this, so that more and more journalists get these opportunities. If it's not going to happen within the newsroom, it has to happen from somewhere outside. So I hope that happens. I'm going to tweak this question to you, Aparna, for you. Let's imagine that journalists covering all kinds of beats, be it health, education, infrastructure, are sensitized for gender. They will be able to naturally apply the gender lens. Wouldn't that be much better than having this one reporter being labeled as a gender reporter?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think, in fact, it would help if this happened in spaces outside of media as well. Like, for example, if you look at the Supreme Court of India, how many women judges do we have in the Supreme Court, right? Like, we have so few. I don't know if society is in a state where we can accept if all the Supreme Court judges, say in America or in India, were women, right? Like, we'd have such a big hue and cry about it. How can they determine something for all of us? But if they're all men, we somehow still manage to, get on with our lives. So I think that shift has to happen in all spheres, or in corporates or in boardrooms, or, as Arun also mentioned this morning, in media houses, the kind of representation, or even in software companies where we do have like a lot of women there, but whether they are there in the managerial roles. So when the power transfer happens, I think the change can happen. More than, reporters being sensitized to gender, can we have more women in the places where the power, the agency, the decisions are done, especially the money, right? Like where the money, somebody who's going to allocate the money, if those people can be more gender sensitized, I think then the whole, narrative can definitely shift. But I think without that, like, it'll be interesting to see what happens when these next governments come across. And we can't have this whole decorative thing, right? Like we can't have a woman's inclusion, for example, having a manel. Some of us, always call this out in Twitter. When we have like, a manel come across, or we have the only woman there who will be like the MC. You can't say that, you have a woman on board, right? Like we have to have those changes also, along with that, change in the reporter. So sensitizing a reporter would have no impact unless we have the sensitization, I think, top down. So,
she mentioned manels, and that's something that I've noticed in the past, a year or so, that every evening panel there's an effort to make sure it's not a manel.
Yeah. I think we've managed it.
Yeah. But I think it's also because we're calling that out so much.
Absolutely.
Right?
But yeah, since you spoke about women being at the center of power, I have a similar question for you, Gayatri. Do you want to narrate a story or a series or a show that you did on the radio, wherein women did much more than just giving quotes? They kind of drove the narrative, they hosted, they looked for story ideas, and they kind of took charge. What was the storytelling like? Did it change?
Kadalosai FM is like a 24/7 channel, and we have around like 9 programs, fixed programs, from morning 6 o'clock up to night 10 o'clock. Out of that, like 5 programs are hosted by women. In that, like 2 programs are hosted by the community women. They get trained and then they come to the radio station and they get trained and then they host the program. In that, like we have one program named as Neidal Penne. In that Neidal Penne, like we talk about the stories from the community and we interview one person from the community weekly once. And apart from this, we have an off-ground program that is called as Ennu Meritum, where like we go and teach the elderly people or women who have not studied literate to calculate, maths, basic maths, to do their own accounts, because like there a lot of the people get into financial debts. They get interest on the interest and all bills more, so they don't know how much they are paying. Actually, they end up in paying more and more and more without knowing the calculation and what is happening exactly, because mostly their children would have been a dropout, or like after 10th or 12th they also will go to sea, and so there will not be any calculation things. So these programs actually helped. We believe that it has helped, and because of their feedbacks what they give, and those programs has created a very big change. And for this Neidal Penne program, we did a scheme saying, as per the government thing, Ministry of Information and Broadcast rule, a program, if a community person is coming and hosting, we can pay them 250 rupees per program. So for this Neidal Penne Nigalshi, like When a woman comes and host, we give them the 250 rupees. So then we realized that there has a lot of inhibitions in coming to the studio, being in the AC room or like recording in front of a computer. They did not come much. So we went to their homes. They'll prepare a story or their kavide or their life story and all. We'll record and then we'll come in and then we pay that. So that created a huge thing. So we believe that this programs has created and sensitized some difference. And we also speak about this gender thing. Like we'll ask them, or cardiac name, surgeon name solunga. And they'll say, whom they'll get into their mind. Or a driver name solunga. Whether they get a female in their head or a male in their teacher, immediately they'll say, tell a female. So these things and all we talk and we gender sensitize and things.
All right, thank you so much for those thoughts. Since we are on the part about how women take center stage and how the storytelling changes, Hannah, I want to come back to you with a question. You did mention Draupadi when you were talking earlier. So in one of your essays, you've said how the depiction of Draupadi changes, Draupadi from Mahabharata changes when it's an all-male troupe performing, and versus when there are more women performers. So what changes? Like, can you just elaborate?
Yes, so we have worked quite a few years, I must say, on the famous or infamous story of the disrobing of Draupadi, Pakadei Tuhil. And I must say, because somewhat different, I think, from the other media which are mediated, this is theater, so we work, per definition, with multiple media. Which is music, spoken language, and the visuals. So I think here the visuals are very important. So what we did when we worked with the same story, because people in the village want to commission Pakadei Tuhil as an all-night performance, but they are not ready to commission anything new, because this is for the goddess in the temple, so she needs to be entertained over the night. So you have to come with this familiar story. So we worked actually on the audience's familiarity with that story and tried to kind of juxtapose that to other ways of showing Draupadi. So for instance, the intervention we made in the dramaturgy is when you have the hair pulling scene where she is dragged by the hair across the stage. When this is done by a man, there is very little resistance. Now imagine a woman being dragged by her hair. Wouldn't you resist? Of course you will, but the male doesn't show it, the male performer. So whether it's a girl or a woman, they worked on that resistance. What would you do when you're being dragged by your hair? And of course you resist, and Dushasana is surprised that there is resistance, because that is a male performer. So for a moment, they are separate. And because they are separate, you have a much more threatening situation dramaturgically on the stage. They can encircle each other, there's this eye contact. So you can work on that scene in a way which creates a different visual for the audience. Also, that scene where she is dragged by the hair. So in Kute, a rope is used instead of the hair because there can't be direct contact with the Draupadi who becomes the goddess later on. And she's always in that bent position. It's also set to specific music, Tripada Talam, which seems to reinforce that submissive position, visual on the stage. But when she's free, you create immediately a totally different visual. So these are the things we worked on, the relationships between Dushasana and Draupadi, and also we provided the play with a different ending. So normally in an all-male company, at the end of the disrobing, the filter disrobing, she will stand on the dais as a kind of meek person. They will descend and go for 12 years into the forest. But in our play, when Duryodhana challenges her to come and sit on his lap, and he orders Dushasana to bring her, she tells him, if you have the guts, play one final game of dice directly to me. And so this is what happens. And then Duryodhana asks her, what is it you have to stake? And she says, my chastity. And so she hits that, in that final game of dice, she hits the dice with her left foot directly into the face of Duryodhana, and this is the game she wins. So they go into exile as free people. So the last visual, the people in the audience take home is that of a victorious Draupadi, which is very different from the submissive woman filled disrobing.
Those are such rich nuances, yeah. And thank you for bringing those points. And I think this discussion requires much more time. And but because we are short on time, I'm going to go and ask you one last question. It's the same question for all of you. Let's imagine a young storyteller or an experienced storyteller in your respective platforms came to you and asked you, I want to tell better gender stories. What's one thing you would want that person to start with? We can start with you, Hannah, first.
Yeah, that's a very important question, because I think working in Kute, we work with a lot of language, and it's very often about how the story is told. And I noticed from my academic writing that when we write about gender, it's very analytical, it's very rational, it's not at all experiential, and that is not the way women in the village talk about gender. And so it is much less abstract. Talk is very often in terms of, it's more symbolic. They use elements from nature or from agriculture to talk about these kind of differences. That is a very different talk and a very different language, even though it is all Tamil from what you and I speak. And so I think it is important to pay attention to the kind of language we use. And I know from theater language is very different from written language. Once you start writing, that per definition has a kind of depersonalization. Though we try to make it personal, it's written on the board, it's visual. Visual in the sense you do it on your own, you read on your own, you don't read aloud, unless it is Mahabharata sword warrior. So that enters your brain in a very different way, and also kind of seems to format your thinking in a specific way. When you watch this story within the community, and you hear these words, they get very different meanings. And I think the way things are being said is something we need to pay better attention to. One small example which we had in the Gurukulam, talking about what we usually call agency. That word nobody in the village will use, agency. But what was the story this boy told, and this was prior to the closure of the school because of the pandemic, when you go home and you want to do something but your parents don't allow you, so talking about agency, what will you do? And then he said, you know, there is this rock and there is an in-depth into the rock. Oh, there's my phone again. And it rains. The water stagnates in that in-depth. The water, that's me. So he depends on others to get something done, and that is talking about agency. In a very symbolic way, this is an 8-year-old child. We go to school, we lose that way of talking.
So language is important, and women's agency. So when we were planning this event for 2 days, Nitya ma'am brought that word, and she kind of drilled it in our heads, and we made it a part of our concept notes. So yeah, thank you, Nitya ma'am. Saurabh, next is you.
So I think one of the things that we've learned to do, and we keep telling, is that when we are thinking of the hook to the story, the lead, we're not going to say if someone's, if it's that she's the first woman to achieve so. And so we're not going to say that. We're going to start with the impact of what her achievement has done. That's one. And the second thing is that, like I said, that's the main cliche we fall for. So stay away from cliches. Hear and narrate. I think that's something that we are trying to do.
I like that. Hear and narrate. Yeah.
So I think 2 points. One is caste. Without caste as a lived experience, you cannot explore gender, because gender is not a monolith, right? Like you can't say that all women experience the same thing, especially in a country like India or in a state like Tamil Nadu where I work in. I don't think my experience of gender is the same as a Dalit woman's experience of gender, right? Especially in a village. So unless I look at, gender and caste together, my story is going to be completely pointless. That's one thing. Second thing is the urban understanding of feminism is very different from a rural understanding of feminism. So when I go in with my ideas of what should be feminism or what should be somebody who's standing up to the system is going to be very different from what the experience of somebody on the ground is. And I think those 2 points I would consider very important.
Yeah, Aparna, I think those are very important points because we've all been there, right? I've been a person living in Mumbai, but we've gone and done rural reporting and we might not know everything and all the nuances as such. So I think those are very important points. Gayatri, yes?
Yeah, first of all, the answer would be yes. And we'll be asking, I'll be asking about like, how are you going to project it? Like, in what way are you going to take it up? Whether you would like to create an impact or you would like to tell a story about it. And then, in order to bring feminism in front, it doesn't mean that we should like put another gender down and then speak this high. So we ensure that the problems are being criticized, not judging or like not blaming on another gender. So that point would be kept in mind because like our audience are very limited in a rural area, like 15-kilometer radius. So one will be knowing another person. So those things will be taken up and kept in the mind.
The sensitivities, yeah. Thank you so much. I wish we had more time, but that brings us to the end of the session. Thank you all for joining me today, and I'm really happy that I could share this stage with you. We can take, do we have time for? We can take, yeah, sure. Let's take questions.
First of all, thank you to all of you. It was quite interesting listening to you. Aparna, thank you for bringing up the caste angle. Because as somebody who's come from the Northeast, I also believe it's my responsibility to talk about the Northeast. And one thing that happens is because so few women are represented in journalism, it sometimes becomes very difficult to talk about within that, who is being represented. So in 2022, News Laundry and Oxfam had done a survey about women participation in journalism. And within that, almost 60% were from the general category. And indigenous women were less than 1.5%. And the News Laundry team told us that thanks to East Mojo, 70% of that 1.5% came from our organization. Because of the 8 states in the Northeast, 6 of our reporters are women. So had they not been in that, the number would have been so small that it wouldn't have been registered. So at the same time, I sometimes believe that it is a little premature to talk about which women are being represented because let's first reach a point where we can have enough women to have this discussion. So not so much as an observation, but just an addition over here that I hope we reach a point where we can actually have discussions on, okay, now that we have a substantial number of women being represented, we should look at who amongst them are being represented because in our region, indigenous women barely get any voice. And one of the best examples I saw it is when there was a coup in Myanmar in 2021. So everybody who was coming to do it as a story was doing it as a security story. And because our correspondent was a woman, she was the first one to talk about the women that were coming and how they are participating in Mizoram and working as laborers. So, because she was a indigenous woman, she brought up an issue that otherwise probably nobody else would have bothered to because they continue to look it as a security and X number of people coming. So thanks to that, and that's why. So I hope we reach a point where we can also look at within the women that are being represented. Hopefully we get an equal or proportional representation of women from all communities. Thank you.
Another question for Aparna ji. Thank you so much for bringing issue of caste in gender issues. I just wanted to request you, could you elaborate more on these things? The moment you bring caste in your story, how does it change the whole worldview, whole perspective of that story? Thank you.
I just wanted to add to the questions. It's been very interesting. But I'm curious to understand, the impact of social media. So social media, you know, you use platform for sharing stories, advocating policy changes, gender equality, etc. But, you know, isn't there a risk? Because you're also reinforcing gender stereotypes. So how are these challenges going to be met?
I'll start with the caste angle. Actually, until I went out into the villages, I was this, you know, very privileged upper caste urban person who did not engage with caste because I have not come across caste, right? Like, and then you go into the villages and then you see what it is out there and how layered the whole thing is, and it opens your eye to the fact that different people have different experiences, which is not my experience of something, right? Like, as very simply in the village, you'll have landowning castes and, you know, the landless, who are typically from the marginalized, having extremely different experiences of being either the person who is driving the work or, you know, getting the work done, right? Like, so driving the work would almost always be agricultural laborers, and their idea of, like, you know, food security, seed sovereignty would be so different from somebody who is a landless person. Sometime back, I was in Arakonam. There is an organization there called SRED, Dr. Fatima Bernard, and she's done a lot of work with landless women in that area, and how they are all coming together in something called as a Pallur collective, and they are taking land, you know, which don't have a patta in that area, and they're farming from it. Some of the women were sitting there. They are, you know, a little older than me, and they were telling me in their families, they have lost land for food. So for us, when we talk about, like, you know, food, what have you given to get food? It's very different. It's almost always money in exchange of food, right? Like, we've not given our lives, we've not given our land. And that has been the lived experience of the Dalits in Tamil Nadu. Like, in one of the more progressive states at this point in time, but just a couple of generations back, it was so different. All these people have lived through that. So their idea of what is land, you know, what land means to them is so different. If we had not looked at it through the caste lens, if we had only looked at it as, you know, women farmers, this whole thing would not have come across. So I think in every case, whether it is a landed person, we have Sarojaka here today. She's a Periyarist. She talks so much about, like, you know, caste and gender in her area. And Kritika, who's also here, who writes so much about caste and gender in Viluppuram district. So I think unless you bring in caste into the story, you actually can't unpack, I think, the impact, you know, it has on gender, if that makes sense. Yeah.
So in the case of Katekute, the theater, we call it by this name, the medium is caste. Because Kute comes from a caste-based agrarian society. And so therefore Kute performances, why is there such a stigma on the theater? Because it's rape. It's hard physical work, and who does that work? The lower or no caste people. So that are the performers. They're not agrarian. Traditionally, they were not involved in agriculture, but they were paid a part of the produce of the crops called Ari for their services. And one of these services were performances. It can be anything else also. It can be barber, dhobi, whatever, carrying the body to the cremation ground, all these kind of things, ritual functions. But it's all caste-based. Now Kut has opened up to other castes, creates another problem. Because who joins? Vanir. They claim their caste background to the Mahabharata. So they use the Mahabharata actually to proclaim caste. So we get into a very different kind of storytelling right now, that when we get an Ambulipa, it needs to be announced by Agni Kula Kshatriya Vanir. You know, so you can't talk about these things without caste. And for the women, they face the problem of being the first women performers in a theater form that is already stigmatized because of caste, so they face a double whammy.
On social media.
No, I think every time we put out a story, we also look at the comments, and that almost always gives away the impact that the story is at, because it's become predictable to the point now, you know, and that's something that we're constantly looking at to see how also the other point, and this has often been debated, I think even in newsrooms, the representation of caste. And in social media, at least today, I think there is a fair share of representation of caste and people are talking about it. And I think that also raises our awareness in the newsroom because we're getting that feedback almost instantly.
Any more questions? Okay. Okay.
Thank you to our panelists for a rich and engaging conversation. May I now invite Dr. Rangalakshmi, Executive Director Area Operations at MSSRF, to facilitate Dr. Hannah De Bruin and Mr. Saurabh Gupta. Thank you. I now invite Mr. Srinivas Raman, Executive Director of Strategy at MSSRF, to felicitate Ms. Aparna Karthikeyan and Ms. Gayatri. Thank you, everyone, for being part of this special event as we celebrate the legacy of Mrs. Mina Swaminathan. We now invite everyone to join us for lunch. I kindly request all the media workshop speakers and participants to reconvene in the Sambasivam Auditorium by 2 p.m. Thank you. Please join us for lunch.